take back control of our own fate and our feelings. We become our own liberator. We tend to think of everything in terms of justice and fairness, that you should get what you pay for, and every debt should be paid in full with interest, of course. But such a perspective can lead to an endless cycle of keeping track of every good deed you do for somebody else and every hurtful thing that someone does to you. Is that really how we want to live? Speaking again about Jesus' parable, Charles Cussar said, forgiveness has to do with something very different from distributive justice. The parable wants us to know that. The first servant in the story, like many of us, still thinks of indebtedness and forgiveness as a power game. He has not come to view himself as the recipient of mercy rather than justice, and is therefore not able to show mercy as mercy has been shown to him. But the parable portrays the incredible kindness of God, who surprises people not by dealing with them on the scale of justice, but by showing mercy. Beyond these incredible acts of forgiveness described by Bishop Tutu in the story about Joseph, there's also another more daily form of forgiveness that we need. In Romans, Paul describes a far more common and frankly petty form of passing judgment on others simply because they don't believe or value something the way that we do. When you have been taught to believe that life is all about measuring up, you usually end up feeling like you fall short, or you become a very good measurer of others, or both. But Paul couldn't have cared less in this passage whether somebody ate the right foods or not. But for him, the right foods, the right religious practices, the right social mores were all far less important than preserving relationship and community with others. Who are you to pass judgment on servants of another, he wrote. It's before their own God that they stand or fall, and they will be upheld. Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Paul asked again. It's not your job, is what he's saying. That's not your job. Why do you despise your brother or your sister? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. Leave it to God. And now we know what Joseph and the psalmist and Jesus all said about God's judgment. Even though you intended harm, God's intention is for good, so have no fear. Joseph said, I will provide for you. As far as the east is from the west. I mean, how far is that? As far as the east is from the west. You can't measure it. So far does God remove our transgressions from us. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like a place where the king will forgive a debt, any debt, even if it's worth 150,000 years of hard labor. Therefore, you also ought to forgive your brother or sister from your heart. I don't know about you, but that message makes me want to take a deep breath. We don't have to stay stuck in an endless cycle of measuring up or getting even or measuring others. We don't have to be held back or weighed down by regret or bitterness. We don't have to wonder whether God still loves us or whether we will ever be able to lay down our guilt or our anger. We can forgive. Even if we don't forget, even when we act to keep ourselves safe from harm or ask for appropriate forms of repayment, we can still forgive from the heart and know the peace and freedom that come with laying down that burden. To forgive, wrote Charles Cussar, to forgive and be forgiven means to give up the power game of playing innocent versus guilty, who's right and who's wrong, and instead join the fellowship of forgiven sinners, which I have to say is all of us. So I pray to come to know that joy, the joy of giving up the power game, knowing that we are forgiven, and learning to forgive others too. And may God help all of us to know that joy.